Esoteric and Hidden Meanings of the First Degree Tracing Board. He who enters the lodge in quest of light should leave all his previous learning behind him and loose the shoes of personal opinion from off his feet. He should think of himself as a child and as being taken into a world of new sights and sounds, and where new ideas and even different logic obtain from those with which he has previously been familiar, and where he must begin to recast his ideas and his life. If it will not, he will continue to darken his own light, and the craft can teach him nothing of value, whatever titular rank he may attain in it. Introduced into Freemasonry in the late 18th century as training devices, tracing boards were, still are, and we trust will ever be, intended to help candidates to master the intricate symbolism that features in the initiation rituals for each degree. Their origin can be traced back to the days when the practice was for the master of the lodge to sketch designs on the lodge floor in chalk to illustrate the point he was making in his lectures to the brethren. Then came floor cloths, and finally, when lodges started to acquire permanent premises, tracing boards themselves. There is a different tracing board for each degree, each one depicting a confusing jumble of apparently disassociated symbols. This is deliberate, as it requires a knowledgeable Freemason to trace and explain the meaning of the symbols. Brethren, the usages and customs of Freemasonry, namely our signs and symbols, our rites and ceremonies, have ever borne a near affinity to ancient mystery schools and secret societies, including those of the Greco-Romans, Chaldeans, Druids, Essenes, Cathars, Rosicrucians, alchemists, and the guilds of the medieval stonemasons. But it has always been considered that was Egypt, the birthplace of the mysteries. It was there that the ceremonies of initiation were first established. Their magi, philosophers and priests, like ourselves, were accustomed to communicate with each other by signs and symbols, and unwilling to expose the knowledge within to vulgar eyes, concealed their peculiar tenets and principles of polity and philosophy under certain hieroglyphical figures. They, as we do, imparted their lessons of wisdom and their legendary lore to those alone, who, bound by oath to never reveal them, were initiated into their institutions of instruction, and even then, only after due trial, certain periods of probation, and in accordance with merit and ability. When confronted with a problem involving the use of reasoning faculties, individuals of strong faculties, individuals of strong intellect, keep their poise and seek to reach a solution by obtaining facts bearing upon the question. Those of immature mentality, on the other hand, when similarly confronted, are overwhelmed. While the former may be qualified to solve the riddle of their own destiny, the latter must be led like a flock of sheep and taught in simple language. The Apostle Paul said that these little ones must be fed with milk, but that meat is the food of strong men. Thoughtlessness is almost synonymous with childishness, while thoughtfulness is symbolic of maturity. There are, however, but a few mature minds in the world, and thus it was that the philosophic religions' doctrines were divided to meet the needs of these two fundamental groups of human intellect, one philosophic, the other incapable of appreciating the deeper mysteries of life. To the discerning few were revealed the esoteric or spiritual teachings, while the unqualified many received only the literal or exoteric interpretations. The Christian priest Origen said that the Egyptian philosophers have sublime notions with regard to the divine nature, which they kept secret and never discovered to the people but under a veil of fables and allegories. Once again, we see the similarities to the teaching methods of Freemasonry, which is performed by way of symbolism and allegory and never revealed to the uninitiated. The Egyptians had initiatic practices inducting neophytes into the ancient knowledge and mysteries. This is an indication that our ritual is based on ancient knowledge. The manner in which, in all probability, Freemasonry was derived from the Egyptian mysteries may be thus explained. It is recorded in the volume of the Sacred Law that Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. If this were so, he must, of necessity, have been regularly initiated into their antient mysteries. Hence, we may fairly conclude that after the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, Moses, Aholiab, and Bezalel, the three grand masters who were called directly to serve God, presided over the first holy lodge, designed a new form of worship, igniting the passion for God among his people. Taking those antient mysteries as their models and retaining much of their practice and symbolism deduced therefrom, they practically formulated the system of Freemasonry and elevated it into a pure and noble science, as it existed and was practiced during the period of those three antient worthies, archetypes of men working together to serve God. Other men like them are repeated again and again in sets of three, who will come together to lead the brothers and sisters of God's people, and so handed down to their successors from generation to generation. Moses served in the prophetic capacity, Bezalel in the construction, and Aholiab in the planning and coordination. Bezalel, whose name means "in the shadow of God," is building something that will provide shadow and protection for the furnishings of worship. Aholiab, whose name means "the Father's tent," is creating the tent that will be a temporary housing for the worship of God until the temple is later built by three other men who were called by God. Pythagoras studied among Egyptians for many years and was also initiated into their ancient mysteries, establishing his system on a similar plan, and many orders of a more recent date have also copied their example. Freemasonry, however, stands preeminent as not only the most ancient but the most honorable order that has ever existed. The most ancient it is, as dating its history from an immemorial antiquity. The most moral it is because every character, figure, and symbol depicted in our lodges has a moral signification and serves to inculcate the practice of virtue upon all its genuine professors. A part of the first degree ritual refers to the Pythagorean system. The predominant number in this degree is 3. Numbers were seen to be mystical by many ancient mystery schools. Each of our degree ceremonies has reference to numbers throughout the rituals. 5 is predominant in the second degree and 7 in the third degree. Number mysticism exists in many of the ancient mysteries in different forms and with many similarities. It is important to note that the modern language probably does not have the capability of explaining the incorporation of philosophy, mathematics, architecture, music, mysticism, and theology found in the Egyptian system. To the ancient philosophers, however, it was their way of life. Number is all, declared the Pythagoreans. The classification of numbers as limited or unlimited, male or female, good or bad, may seem strange at first, until we consider the thinking that lead to these attributes. In this modern world, logic and reason drive everything, And yet our senses provide information that is not always related to reason. Hence there are realms where reason has no access, and this includes the paths of initiatic traditions. For them, numbers do not refer to amounts, but rather indicate functions and principles upon which the universe is created and maintained. 1. The absolute, the unity, unpolarized energy, primordial scission. It is incomprehensible and unfathomable to human faculties. 1 is represented in our lodges by the Supreme Being, God, the Grand Geometrician, the Almighty, the Great Architect of the Universe, the Most High. 1 becomes 2. 2 is not 1 plus 1, since metaphysically there is only one, which is all. 2 expresses polarization and fundamental opposition. 2 is represented in our lodges by the checkered pavement. The establishment of a relationship between two opposing forces becomes a third force. 1 in becoming 2 becomes 3 simultaneously. It is the becoming that is the third force, providing the innate and mysterious reconciling principle, represented in our lodges prolifically. The sun, the moon, and the master, the 3 principal officers, the 3 steps to the altar, the 3 great lights, the 3 great pillars, the 3 theological virtues, the 3 grand offerings, the 3 movable jewels, the 3 immovable jewels, the 3 grand principles, and the 3 distinguishing characteristics of a Mason, among others. Likewise, the Egyptians and the Pythagorean system, who used signs and symbols to conceal their principles. The Masonic ritual conceals much of its connection to antient mysteries. Some emphasize, however, that at this stage our present system is not one coming from remote antiquity, for there is no direct continuity between us and the Egyptians, or even those ancient Hebrews who built the temple at Jerusalem. They nevertheless accept and recognize that what is extremely ancient in Freemasonry is the spiritual doctrine concealed within the architectural phraseology. For this doctrine is an elementary form of the doctrine that has been taught in all ages, no matter in what garb it has been expressed. In explaining the tracing board of this degree, let me, in the first place, direct your attention to the form of the lodge, which has been described as rectangular, oblong, regular, parallelepiped, or cube. Also, the form of the lodge refers to the way in which human nature has been composed and constituted. The length, breadth, height, and depth of man's own being, his body and his spirit are holy ground upon which he should build the altar of his own spiritual life. In ordinary lodges, their dimensions are regulated by the probable numbers of brethren assembling therein, but in a more extended view, taking the whole body of Freemasons throughout the world as forming one grand and universal lodge, its dimensions may be said to be: in length from east to west, in breadth from north to south, in height from the surface of the earth to its center, even as high as the heavens. Esoterically speaking, the depth of the lodge indicates to the difference in depth between the superficial consciousness of our material mentality and the degree of divine consciousness resident at man's spiritual center. It also implies that the range of spiritual consciousness possible to us when we have developed our spiritual faculties to the full is infinite. The area of our lodge is said to be of this vast extent in order to show the universality of the science, and further, that a Freemason's charity and benevolence should know no bounds save those of prudence. The phrase "as high as the heavens" serves also as to point out to us that our thoughts and desires, hopes and aspirations, our oblations of praise and thanksgiving, should always be directed upward and heavenward, even to the throne of God Himself. All lodges are consecrated before being instituted, and consequently, they are sacred ground. Therefore, as Masons, we should be very conscious of all that we think, say, and do while in a lodge. Our lodge stands on holy ground because the Grand and Royal Lodge of Jerusalem, the model and grand exemplar of all succeeding lodges, was held upon a plot of ground. Our lodges stand due east to west, because all places of divine worship, as well as Masons' well-formed and regularly constituted lodges, are or ought to be so situated, for which we assign 3 reasons. Firstly, the sun, the glory of the Lord and the center of our system, rises in the east and sets in the west. Secondly, learning and civilization had their origin in the east, and then spread their benign influence to the west. There is likewise a third, last, and grand reason. Whenever we contemplate the beautiful works of creation, how ready and cheerful ought we to be to adore the Almighty Creator. From the earliest recorded period of man's dwelling upon the face of the earth, down to the time of the giving of the law upon Mount Horeb, through all the intervening ages of comparative darkness, we have been taught to believe in the existence of a deity who has never left himself without a living witness among men. We read early in the Holy Writ that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to the Lord than did his brother Cain, that Enoch walked with God, for God took him, that Noah was a just and upright man, a preacher of repentance and righteousness to that evil and adulterous generation among whom he lived, that Abraham was faithful with all his house, insomuch that he was called the friend of God, that Jacob on his journey to Padan Aram was favored with that peculiar manifestation of the providential care of the Almighty, namely the vision of the angels commemorated in our lodges under the symbol of Jacob's ladder, that Joseph in Egypt bore witness to the truth, both in prison and in the court of Pharaohs, and lastly, that Moses chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to remain in Egypt, even as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. But we find no record of any place having been set apart for the public solemnization of the worship of the one true God, until after the exodus of the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt, which it pleased the Almighty to effect with a high hand and a stretched out arm, under the conduct of his 3 most celebrated institutions, namely the moral, ceremonial, and judicial laws. Through his servant Moses, caused a tent or tabernacle to be erected in the wilderness to serve as a receptacle for the Ark of the Covenant and the tables of the law, as well as for the public solemnization of divine worship. That tent or tabernacle was, during the migration of the Israelites in the wilderness, by God's especial command, always pitched due east to west, and was, some generations later, taken as the model with respect to its ground plan and position for that magnificent temple which was erected at Jerusalem by that wise and mighty sovereign King Solomon, the regal splendor and unparalleled luster of which transcend our powers of description. This is the third, last, and the grand reason which Freemasons give why all places of divine worship, as well as all regularly constituted Masonic lodges, are or ought to be so situated east and west. Our lodges are supported by 3 great pillars, namely wisdom, strength, and beauty. Divine wisdom to direct us in all our undertakings, His strength to support us in all our dangers and difficulties, and His beauty to adorn the inward man. On them we moralize thus: the universe is the temple of the Almighty Creator, Wisdom, strength, and beauty are around his throne as pillars of his works. His wisdom is infinite omniscience, his strength omnipotent, and beauty shines forth throughout the whole creation in symmetry and order, the heavens as a canopy, omnipresence. He has planted the earth as his footstool. He has crowned his temple with stars as with a diadem, and in his hands he holds all power and glory. The sun, the moon, and all the starry hosts move obedient to his divine will, and all his laws are concord. The three great pillars which support our lodge are emblems of these divine attributes: wisdom, strength, and beauty, further representing Solomon, king of Israel, Hiram, king of Tyre, and Hiram Abif. Solomon, king of Israel, for his wisdom in building and dedicating the temple at Jerusalem to God's service. Hiram, king of Tyre, for his strength in supporting with men and materials. And Hiram Abif, for his curious and masterly workmanship in beautifying and adorning the building. They have also a further reference, namely, to the master and the two wardens, who, during their tenure of these offices, are the chief pillars and supporters of the lodge, over which they were called to preside. These pillars also allude to the three pillars of the Kabbalistic tree of life: mercy, severity, and equilibrium. As none of the noble orders of architecture are known by the names of wisdom, strength, and beauty, we refer to them with the three which bear the nearest analogy to those qualities, namely the Ionic, the Doric, and the Corinthian. In religious practices, the altar is usually situated in the east of the building and is used for offerings and communion. However, in Freemasonry, the altar is seen as a sacred place, solemn and binding, where we make our vows and give our commitments. The altar is in the shape of a cube, situated in the center of the lodge, and as the lodge is representative of an individual, hence, the altar symbolizes the sacred place at our own center. The volume of the sacred law rests on the altar, therefore the area immediately surrounding both is also to be considered sacred. The Holy Writ can be seen as representing deity, the creator, the great architect, the universal source of all. It is typically a sacred text such as the Quran, the Old Testament, and others representing the belief of the candidate and the brethren attending the ceremony. It is permitted to have more than one sacred text at once, as this serves to evidence the religious openness and tolerance that Freemasonry professes and practice. The presence of holy texts at the altar invites us to discover a deeper meaning, for these books are the symbolic emblem of the invisible cosmic law or natural law through which the Creator manifests himself in the universe. They symbolize the Creator, whose law is the basis for everything in existence. This law is also known as natural law or universal law. These laws can be expressed by the following Hermetic principles: the principle of mentalism, the substantial reality, the all which underlies all the outward manifestations and appearances of the material universe, matter, energy, and all that is apparent to our material senses, is spirit. Spirit in itself is unknowable and undefinable, but may be thought of as a universal, infinite living mind. The principle of correspondence. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a harmony, agreement, and correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various planes of being and life. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as below, so above, helps in solving many paradoxes and hidden secrets of nature. The principle of vibration. This principle states that everything is in motion, nothing is at rest, and everything vibrates. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The principles of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of swing to the right is the measure of swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Understanding these laws is essential for spiritual development. The compasses resting upon the VSL represents the cosmic or divine principle, springing from the Creator into manifestation, both cosmically and in the individual. It represents the candidate's spiritual nature. It is taught in all the mysteries that each person has within him a portion of the divine. The square representing cosmic matter, in which the divine principle takes physical form in the universe. This implement also represents the lower nature or material being of the candidate. Together, the three great lights at the altar reveal a divine purpose of spirit and matter working in unison, and according to cosmic law, to construct a perfect universe, occupied by beings seeking perfection in order to stop further descent into the material world and the lower spheres. Consciously ending this fall is a mandatory and unescapable step that must be achieved prior to initiating the spiritual ascension, that mystical return to the Creator. It is contained in the teachings of the Antient Mysteries that this is our purpose while on this terrestrial plane. In the first degree, the points of the compasses are concealed beneath the square, implying that the candidate's spirit is currently overlain and prevented from full function by the tendencies of his material body. If man is to commence a journey of perfecting himself on his spiritual return to the Creator, he must not allow his spiritual principle to continue subordinated to the material flesh and its mundane tendencies. Man must develop and display his superiority over them as described in the Antient Mysteries. The covering of our lodge is a celestial canopy of divers colors, even the heavens. We hope to arrive at the summit by the help of a ladder, known in the scripture as Jacob's ladder. This ladder is composed of as many staves or rounds as comprise all the moral virtues, but it has three principal ones, which are faith, hope, and charity. Faith in the great architect of the universe, hope in salvation, and charity towards all mankind. This ladder springs from and has its origin in the volume of the sacred law, because by the doctrines contained in that holy book, we are taught to believe in the wise dispensation of divine providence. Belief strengthens our faith, and faith is the first principal step. Faith in its higher, that is, its spiritual sense, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It is the bond of amity and the chief support of civil society. We live and walk by faith. By faith, we have hope and acknowledgement in the existence of a supreme being. By faith, we are justified, accepted, and finally received in his favor. By adopting this faith in all its fullness and carrying it out in the practice of our daily lives, we may hope to attain the fruition of the scriptural promise, "They just shall live by faith." This faith naturally creates in us the hope of becoming partakers of the blessed promises contained in the sacred volume, and hope is the second principal step. Hope is the anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that which is within the veil. Therefore, let a firm reliance upon the Almighty's faithfulness fill us with hope and a full assurance that He will guide and direct us in all our ways, and will aid us in all our lawful undertakings, so that by faith and patience we may hope to be numbered among those who shall inherit the promises both in this life and in that which is to come. Hope teaches us to fix our desires within the limits of His most blessed promises. So shall success attend us. If we believe a thing to be impossible, our own despondency is apt to render it so. But perseverance in a just cause will ultimately overcome all difficulties. In John Brown's Master Key of 1802, we read, "In all regular, well-formed Freemasons' lodges, there is a point within a circle, in going round which it is said, the master and brethren cannot materially err. The circle is bounded on the north and south by two perpendicular parallel lines. That on the north is said to represent St. John the Baptist, and that on the south, St. John the Evangelist. On the upper points of these lines and on the periphery of the circle rest the Holy Bible, supporting Jacob's ladder, which it is said reaches to the watery clouds of heaven. It also contains the dictates of an unerring, omnipotent, and all-wise being, so that while we are as conversant therein and obedient thereto as either of the St. Johns were, it will bring us to Him that will neither deceive nor be deceived by us. Therefore, by keeping ourselves so circumscribed, it is impossible we can materially err." The parallel lines are also considered to represent Moses and King Solomon. Likewise, they signify death as winter solstice and rebirth as summer solstice, further suggesting the zodiacal signs of Capricorn and Cancer. When the sun is at these points, it has reached its greatest southern and northern declination, producing the most evident effects on the temperature of the seasons and on the length of the days and nights. The months when the sun reaches these points are respectively December and June, which coincide with the anniversary celebration of St. John the Evangelist and St. John the Baptist by the Church. Mystically, they represent one of the cosmic laws, the principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in, everything has its tides, all things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The point within the center is intended to introduce the neophyte to the concept of the center, representing the center of our being. This has a profound mystical significance. It is in our center that we find our true selves, our spirit, our divine spark, and it is only from the center that we can truly communicate with the divine essence. We cannot materially err when our thoughts, intentions, and actions arise from the center. For in the words of the ancient Greek philosopher and polymath Aristotle, when expounding on his golden mean, he instructed us that virtue is found at the center. Esoterically, and in ancient mysticism, the point within the center was seen as the union in pairs of the phallus and ketes, the lingam and yoni, the sun and the universe. The third and last moral virtue, being charity, comprehend the whole. Charity is the brightest gems that can adorn our Masonic crown. Charity is the Corinthian pillar whose entablature adds strength, beauty, and grace to the Masonic fabric. Charity is the radiant spark emanating from God, the inexhaustible source of love. If we attempt to eulogize its charms, the cooler powers of the mind melt into ecstasy. The heart is at empire, and every discordant passion bows before its lenient sovereignty. Not the charity circumscribed by the narrow limits of feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, or binding up the wounds of the afflicted, but that broader, nobler charity that regards all men as brothers. The charity that is swift of foot and ready of hand in the cause of common humanity. The charity which writes a brother's vices in water and his virtues in enduring brass. Charity's superstructure is friendship, morality, and brotherly love, and whose capstone is holiness to the Lord. The Freemason who is in possession of this virtue in its fullest sense, as it is defined in our lectures, may justly be deemed to have reached the summit of Freemasonry, figuratively speaking, an ethereal mansion veiled from mortal eyes by the starry firmament, which is emblematically depicted in our lodges by 7 stars, having reference to 7 regularly made masons, without which number no lodge is perfect and no candidate can be lawfully initiated therein. Charity ever lovely in itself, it is the best test and surest proof of the sincerity of our religion. Happy is the man who has sown in his breast the seeds of benevolence. He envieth not his neighbor. He believes not a tale when told by a slander. Malice or revenge having no place in his breast, he forgives the ill intent of his fellows. And as we are brethren, let us be ever ready to listen to him that craveth our assistance, and from him who is in want let us not withhold a liberal hand. So shall a heartfelt satisfaction reward our labors, and the outcome of love, charity, and benevolence will most assuredly follow. The interior of our lodge comprises ornaments, furniture, and jewels. The ornaments are the mosaic pavement, the indented or tessellated border, and the blazing star. The mosaic pavement, by reason of being variegated and checkered, points out to us the diversity of objects which decorate and adorn the whole creation, the animate as well as the inanimate parts thereof. As the steps of man are trodden in the various and uncertain incidents of life, his days checkered by a strange contrariety of events, and his passage through this existence, although sometimes attended by prosperous circumstances, yet often beset by a multitude of evils, so our lodges are thus furnished with mosaic work to remind us of the uncertainty of all earthly things. Today we may tread in the flowery meads of prosperity, tomorrow we may totter on the uneven paths of weakness, temptations, and adversity. While we have such moral emblems before us, we are taught not to boast of anything, but to give heed to our ways, and walk with humility and uprightness before God. For such is our situation in this life, that there is no part of it where pride can be with stability founded. For although some are born to fill more elevated situations in life than others, yet in the grave we are all on the level. For death destroys all earthly distinctions. Then, while our feet tread on this mosaic work, let us act as the dictates of right reason shall prompt us, to cultivate harmony, practice charity, and live in peace with all men. The black and white checkered floor is a symbol of the duality of all things connected with life and of human nature. Everything material is characterized by inextricably joined opposites. The principle of polarity is one of the cosmic laws, which states that everything is dual, everything has its pair of opposites. There is a mystical understanding that opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Spirit and matter are the two poles of the same thing, the intermediate planes being merely degrees of vibration. By understanding this principle, one can, by the exercise of will, move from one state to the opposite. The indented or tessellated border refers us to the planets, which in their various revolutions form a beautiful border or skirt work round that grand luminary, the sun, as our order does round that of a Masonic lodge. On the lodge floor, it is seen as binding together the mosaic pavement and the blazing star. As it is shown in the tracing board, it should, from the mystical point, be seen as encompassing everything in it, binding all the elements that we are discussing into a single system where each element relates to and interacts with each of the other elements. The blazing star, or glory in the center, refer us to that grand luminary, the sun, which enlightens the earth and by its benign influence dispenses its blessing to mankind in general. The star also represents divine providence. In the Christian religion, divine providence is granted through requests in prayers. The scriptures state, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." From a mystical viewpoint, the star represents the universe in its entirety, the manifested creator, and the cosmic laws, which relates to the principle of mentalism, also called the law of thought. The all is mind, the universe is mental. The universe is simply a mental creation of the all. The universe exists in the mind of the all, in which mind we live and have our being. Applying the principle of correspondence as above, so below to humanity, the mind can be used for our personal well-being and collective advancement. This principle shows that energy, power, and matter are subordinate to mastery of mind. While all is in the all, it is equally true that the all is in all. To him who truly understands this truth hath come great knowledge. Concealed in this statement is one of the greatest religious, philosophical, and scientific truths. Simply put, divine providence comes from a manifestation by the universe of what you have in mind. Hence, be careful of what you put in your own mind. Using the words of Albert Pike, we must thoroughly cleanse and purify our hearts to their innermost recesses before we can of right contemplate that flaming star, which is the emblem of the divine and glorious Shekinah, or presence of God, before we dare approach the throne of supreme wisdom. The furniture of the lodge consists of the volume of the sacred law, the compasses, and the square. The sacred volume is derived from God and is the revelation of himself to mankind in general. The compasses belongs to the Grand Master. Square belongs to the whole craft. The volume of the sacred law is derived from God, because he has been pleased to reveal more of his divine will in that holy book than by any other means. The compasses, the chief implement used in the formation of all architectural plans and designs, is peculiarly appropriated to the Grand Master as a symbol of his dignity, he being the head and the chief ruler of the craft. The members of the craft, having been individually obligated within the square, are consequently bound always to act thereupon. Three are movable and three are immovable. They are called jewels, for we use them to represent the highest standard of morals. They are thus likened to what is precious and great worth. The movable jewels are the square, the level, and plumb rule. These, however, being the appropriated working tools of the second degree, it would not only be inexpedient, but unconstitutional to explain them, except in a fellow crafts lodge. They are called movable jewels because they are severally worn by the master and the two wardens and are transferred to their successors on the day of installation. The immovable jewels are the tracing board, the rough ashlar, and the perfect ashlar. The tracing board is for the master to lay lines and draw designs on. The rough ashlar is for the entered apprentice to work, mark, and indent upon. The perfect ashlar is for the more expert craftsman to try and adjust his jewels upon. They are called immovable jewels because they lie open and unmoved in the lodge for the brethren to moralize upon in this manner, as the tracing board enables the operative mason to carry on the intended structure with order, regularity, and precision. So the volume of the sacred law may justly be designated as the spiritual tracing board of the grand architect of the universe. Therein are laid down such divine laws and moral designs, that if we are fully conversant therewith and strictly obedient thereto, they would not fail through God's mercy to bring us to that ethereal mansion of which we have recently spoken, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. The rough ashlar is a stone, rough and unhewn as taken from the quarry, until by the skill and industry of the workman it is modeled, wrought into due form, and rendered a fit stone for the intended structure. The rough ashlar also represents the mind of man in his infant, primitive, or savage state, rough and unpolished as is the stone, until, by the advantages of a liberal and enlightened education, his mind becomes cultivated, and he is thus rendered a fit member of any properly organized and civilized society. The perfect ashlar is a stone fit to be tried by the square and the compasses. This morally represent the mind of a man in the decline of years, after a well-spent life in acts of piety and virtue, which cannot otherwise be tried and approved than by the square of God's word and the compasses of his own self-convincing conscience. The contrivance called a Lewis is of doubtless antiquity, being known by the Romans in their day, who used it in the building of the Flavian amphitheater, and the Saxons in the building of Whitby Abbey in the 7th century. There is evidence for believing that the device was employed in putting into place some of the more massive stones of Hadrian's Wall or Roman Wall, AD 120-209. For what appears to have been Lewis holes can still be seen in parts built by the Roman Emperor Severus, who heavily repaired the wall in AD 209. The Masonic Lewis is an important part of the Masonic tradition, and its history stretches back centuries. It is a symbol that has been used by Freemasons from around the world to represent their fraternity and the values that they hold dear. Frequently, the smooth ashlar is shown suspended from a rope or chain attached to a tripod, derrick, or crane. This artifact is known as a Lewis. The use of the tripod assembly was introduced and fostered by the Moderns branch of the Grand Lodge of England. Although the term applies to the entire apparatus, strictly speaking, a Lewis is the clamp that fits into a mortise made to receive it, which is cut in the stone and, when lifted, locks inside the stone, sometimes called strong grip or cramp. It is used by operative masons to raise heavy stones to great heights with little encumbrance, and to place them into their final position in a building with safety and precision. Symbolically, the stone in the Lewis indicates the point just before the stone has attained its ultimate purpose, its near perfect state. Although the Lewis is often held to be a piece of lodge equipment that is present in every Masonic lodge, whilst it is common throughout England, it is rare in lodges in Scotland and America. This perhaps owing to the fact that Freemasons in one country may emphasize one particular aspect of the practice, but not another. Indeed, there may be substantial differences between Masonic practice in one country and another. The words Lewis and Louveteau, which in their original meaning import two very different things, have in Masonry an equivalent signification, the former being used in English, the latter in French, to designate the son of a Mason. Symbolically, the word Lewis denotes strength, stability, and support. The eldest son of a Freemason is called a Lewis, he being, in the expressive language of the Bible, the firstborn of his father's strength. It is his duty, when arrived at years of maturity, to bear the burden and heat of the day, from which his parents, by reason of age, ought to be exempt. He is also called upon to assist, or if need be, to maintain them in their old age, to render the close of their days comfortable and happy. For this fulfillment of his filial duty, he has the privilege of being made a Freemason in precedence of any other person, however dignified by birth, rank, or fortune. The word Louveteau signifies in French a young wolf. The application of the term to the son of a Mason is derived from a peculiarity in some of the initiations into the ancient mysteries. In the mysteries of Isis, which were practiced in Egypt, the candidate was made to wear the mask of a wolf's head. Hence, a wolf and a candidate in these mysteries were often used as synonymous terms. Macrobius, in his Saturnalia, says in reference to this custom that the ancients perceived a relationship between the sun, the great symbol in these mysteries, and a wolf, which the candidate represented at his initiation. For, he remarks, as the flocks of sheep and cattle fly and disperse at the sight of the wolf, so the flocks of stars disappear at the approach of the sun's light. You may also recollect that in the Greek language, leukos signifies both the sun and a wolf. Hence, as the candidate in the Isiac Mysteries was called a wolf, the son of a Freemason in the French lodges of the 1740s is called a young wolf, or a Louveteau, in the same way that Lewis was used in England about the year 1738 to designate the uninitiated son of a Freemason. Several jurisdictions choose to specify that the tripod assembly must be located in the west, near the senior warden. The reasoning behind this is that the senior warden, representing the setting sun, symbolizes man in the decline of years. Thus, it is most appropriate that the Lewis assembly should be placed near him. Ideally, the smooth ashlar, or father, should be in a raised position to indicate that the Lewis, that is, the sun, is supporting him. A Masonic Lewis can be useful in many ways for Masonry. It can be used as a symbol of strength and support within the lodge, as well as for physical support in raising heavy stones or other objects. Also serves as an important reminder that everyone has something to contribute to the lodge, no matter how small it may seem. Furthermore, it can help to bring brethren together and remind them that they are all part of one collective effort. In addition, it can serve as a reminder of the bond between brothers and sisters in Freemasonry, that they are always there for each other no matter what. Lastly, there is a Lewis jewel, which has been in use in England and other jurisdictions under the United Grand Lodge of England for many decades to honor a new Mason's father. The Lewis jewel consists of two bars connected by chains. The upper bar contains the name of the father and date of his initiation. The lower bar, the name of the son and date of his initiation. At the bottom section, this jewel contains a replica of the strong grip of the Lewis, and by members wearing their own personalized version, are also able to show pride in their membership within Freemasonry, and each time they wear it, they are reminded of those values which make them part of something greater than themselves, something which transcends time itself. The three grand principles upon which Freemasonry is founded are brotherly love, relief, and truth. They are thus illustrated. Brotherly love. By the exercise of brotherly love, we are taught to regard the whole race of mankind as one family. The high, the low, the rich, the poor are all created by the same Almighty Parent and sent into the world for the mutual aid, support, and protection of each other. Upon this grand principle, Freemasonry unites men of every nation and creed, sect, and opinion, thereby promotes and maintains a sincere friendship among those who might otherwise have remained personally unknown or indifferent to each other. Relief. To relieve the distressed, if in one's power, is a duty incumbent upon every man, and more particularly upon us as Freemasons, who ought to be linked together in an indissoluble bond of sincere affection and brotherly love. Hence, to soothe the unhappy, to sympathize with their misfortunes, to be compassionate with their afflictions, to relieve their necessities, and to bring peace to their troubled minds, should be to us a labor of love as well as a duty. Upon this broad basis of sympathy, mutual comfort, and help in time of need, we form our connections and establish our friendships of Freemasons. Truth is a divine attribute and the foundation of every Masonic virtue. To be good and true is one of the earliest lessons which we are taught at our initiation. In obedience to this precept, hypocrisy and deceit should be unknown among us, while sincerity and plain dealing should be the unvarying practice of our daily lives, both with our brethren and with the outside world, whilst the heart and tongue should be ready to join in promoting each brother's welfare. The two ends of the lodge facing severally due east and west, and the two sides facing respectively north and south, and the four tassels pendant at the four corners of the lodge, indicate the four cardinal points of the compass, representing to us the four cardinal virtues, namely temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. Temperance consists in such needful restraint of our appetites and affections as will bring the body into subjection to the monitions of the will and conscience, and will be an effectual guard against the allurements of vice. This virtue ought to be the constant practice of every Freemason. He will thereby be taught to avoid excess in all things, and to refrain from all vicious and licentious associates and pursuits, which, if indulged in, might lead him unwarily to betray his trust. As expressed in the First Degrees Catechism of the Scottish Freemasonry Comprehensive Monitor, Masons are free to enjoy good fellowship and ought to be free from vice. Fortitude implies a firm and steadfast purpose of the soul, equally removed from rashness and from cowardice. It enables its possessor to undergo any labor, pain, difficulty, or danger which it may be clearly his duty to do, to dare or to suffer, either for himself or for others. Every Freemason ought to attain to this virtue of fortitude as a fence and security against any attack that may be made upon him by treachery or violence, to extort from him any of those secrets which he has solemnly engaged to conceal and never willfully reveal, the revealing of which would inevitably prove an unceasing torment to his mind. Prudence teaches us to regulate our lives and actions by the dictates of reason, and is that habit of mind by which men wisely judge all things relative to their temporal and eternal happiness. It should be the distinguishing characteristic of every free and accepted Mason, not only for the better regulation of his own life and actions, but for the influencing force of his example to those who are not Freemasons. Prudence may be defined as that calm and deliberate habit of mind which we accustom ourselves maturely to weigh and to consider well any proceeding, or enterprise, or course of action which may be proposed or may suggest itself for our adoption, and to do only that which reason and conscience will approve. Prudence is the mother of caution. At our initiation we are taught to be cautious. It is therefore the duty of every Freemason to exercise prudence and caution in all things, and more especially among strangers, and in all mixed companies, lest by unguarded word or careless gesture he should inadvertently betray any of our secrets. Justice is that fixed and immutable standard of right which teaches us to render to every man his due, without partiality and without distinction. This virtue is the foundation of every divine and every moral law. Where justice is not supreme, then universal confusion must inevitably ensue. Lawless violence will overcome the principles of equity, and the whole social system will become disorganized and eventually broken up. As justice rules and directs the conduct of every good man, so it should especially be the constant and unerring guide of every Freemason. The distinguishing characteristics of our order are virtue, honor, and mercy. Virtue. The Masonic ethos nurtures the love of virtue and teaches the virtue of love. It employs a ritualistic, symbolic, and allegorical revelation of profound ways of contemplation and action that arise from our natural attraction to the divine light of goodness, truth, and beauty. More importantly, it includes the freely chosen obligation to actively pursue those ways in the loving, mutual support of kindred spirits and to extend them to all others. This ethos is therefore offered as a guide to individually and collectively reflect, participate in, and commune with Masonry's shared inspiration of making real that spiritual temple, that house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. In perusing the records of ancient Rome, it was discovered that the great and successful General Marcellus, who was thrice consul of Rome, once intended to erect a temple dedicated to both virtue and honor, but being at that time prevented from carrying his design into execution, he afterwards altered his plans and built 2 temples, so situated that the only avenue to the Temple of Honor lay through the one dedicated to virtue, thereby bequeathing an impressive symbolical lesson to posterity that the only direct road to honor must be through that of virtue. Virtue is the highest exercise and improvement of reason, the integrity, harmony, and just balance of affection, the health, strength, and beauty of the soul. The perfection of virtue is to give to the noble faculty of reason its fullest, freest scope, to obey the dictates of conscience with alacrity, to exercise towards all men a calm and diffusive charity, to love and adore God with an unrivaled reverence and affection, and to acquiesce in the wise dispensation of divine providence with humble resignation. Any advance toward this standard is a step on the way to perfection and happiness, and any deviation therefrom tends to vice and misery. Honor is the most manly and dignified sentiment or impulse of the soul which virtue is capable of inspiring. The actions of all good men are regulated by honor, insomuch that the laws which are requisite to restrain and to coerce men of ordinary minds are unnecessary in the case of those whose lives and actions are regulated by the strict code of honor. It is also the highest incentive to the performance of the most heroic and disinterested actions, implying, as it does, the united principles of faith, truth, and justice, carried by an enlightened mind far beyond the obligations which the laws of the land may require, or of which they can punish the violation. For the man of honor will not content himself with the bare and literal discharge of his duty as a man and a citizen, but he exalts and dignifies it, even to magnanimity. He gives where he might without impropriety refuse, and he forgives where he might in strict justice resent. Honor, although a different principle from religion, produces the same effects. For even as their lines of action are differently drawn and variously extended, they terminate in the same point. Religion embraces virtue as it is enjoined by the laws of God, honor as it is graceful and comely to human nature. The religious man fears, but the man of honor scorns, to do an ill action. The one considers vice as beneath him, the other as offensive to the deity. The one as unbecoming, the other as that which is strictly forbidden. In this sense, virtue and honor united have been, and we trust, will ever continue to be, distinguishing characteristics of every free and accepted Mason, even unto the end of time. Mercy is a sublime principle held sacred by every good mind. If possessed by the monarch, it adds a brilliancy to every gem that adorns his crown. It gives glory to his ministers, and an unfading freshness to the wreath that decks the warrior's brow. It is the companion of true honor, and should always temper justice, interposing a shield of defense on behalf of the offender, impenetrable to her sword. Mercy, like its sister charity, blesses him who gives as well as him whom receives. And as the vernal showers descend to refresh and invigorate the vegetation of the earth, so mercy, acting on the heart of man, when tainted with rancor and revenge by its exhilarating warmth, restores perverse nature to its original source in purer streams. It is the chief attribute of the deity, on who the best as well as the wisest of us must rests his hopes and dependence. It is a duty we owe even to an enemy. To show mercy and forgiveness is highly pleasing in the sight of our Creator, for it is written, "Forgive, and it shall be forgiven unto you." And again, "Blessed is the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy, not only in this transitory life, but in that better and eternal life which is to come. And when we, my brethren, shall all be finally arraigned at his dread tribunal, and the actions of our past lives are there unfolded to view, though justice may demand our condemnation, may mercy interpose and avert that awful doom." The sanctum sanctorum of Freemasonry is ornamented with the Gnostic jewels of 1,000 ages. Its rituals ring with the divinely inspired words of seers and sages. 100 religious have brought their gifts of wisdom to its altar. Arts and sciences unnumbered have contributed to its symbolism. Freemasonry is a worldwide university teaching the liberal arts and sciences of the soul to all who will hearken to its words. Its chairs are seats of learning, and its pillars uphold an arch of universal education. Its tracing boards are inscribed with eternal verities of all ages, and upon those who comprehend its sacred depths has dawned the realization that within Freemasonry mysteries lie hidden, the long-lost arcana sought by all peoples since the genesis of human reason. The philosophic power of Freemasonry lies in its symbols, its priceless heritage from the mystery school of antiquity. Though the temples of Thebes and Karnak be now but majestic heaps of broken and time-battered stone, the spirit of Egyptian philosophy still marches triumphant through the centuries. Though the rock-hewn sanctuaries of the ancient Brahmins be now deserted and their carvings crumble into dust, still the wisdom of the Vedas endures. Though the oracles be silenced and the house of the mysteries be now rows of ghostly columns, still shines the spiritual glory of Hellas with luster undiminished. Though Zoroaster, Hermes, Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle are now but dim memories in a world once rocked by the transcendency of their intellectual genius, still, in the mystic temple of Freemasonry, these god-men live again in their words and symbols. And the candidate, passing through the initiations, feels himself face to face with these illuminated hierophants of days long past,